your butter, the salt to the vinegar on the chips of life for you. Mm-hmm. Bluegrass music. Love it. We're going to talk a little bit about it today because it's a very unique to Appalachia, or not necessarily unique, but it finds its origins there.
Yeah.
I have a question for you before we get rolling on this.
Yeah.
Because first of all, let's lay the foundation. You speak from some authority in this. You come from a bluegrass royalty of a family. As you've mentioned before, your dad has a Grammy. Your mom and your dad are unbelievable musicians, like incredible. Mm-hmm. Bluegrass, do you know why it's called bluegrass? I've always wondered that. I assumed it had something to do with Kentucky, but I have no idea.
Yeah, so the father of bluegrass music is from Kentucky, and his band name was Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys. And so from that developed an entire genre. So we can all thank Kentucky and the Bluegrass State and our buddy Bill Monroe, who we will talk more about later in this segment. But yeah, that's where bluegrass comes from.
Oh, okay. So it was a little bit of Kentucky reference there. Well, cool.
Yeah.
Get us started. What do we need to know about to begin with?
Well, I if you're watching on YouTube, you see my amazing hat. It says Bluegrass music. Try it. You'll like it. I will stand by this forever. I really think that bluegrass is an underappreciated art form. It has some of the most talented musicians out there who are playing in the scene. And so if you've never tried bluegrass music, I hope that after this episode you'll give it a try. I am incredibly proud to be a bluegrass fan. I'm incredibly proud of my dad as a banjo player. I grew up getting, absolutely teased to death about my dad being a hillbilly hick banjo player, my mom being a hillbilly hick banjo player. And it's made me... It's so shitty. And even people in Appalachia do that because they look down on it as a working class, poor person's form of entertainment. Everywhere you look, when you see depictions in media about, either it's a cartoon, maybe you go to a country person and the things that I'm thinking of are like depictions of hillbillies. You always hear banjo music in the background. And so it's definitely looked down on. But bluegrass is a traditionally all acoustic music that developed and became popular in Appalachia in the 20th century and is still popular today. Its influences come from Scotch Irish, German, and African people who were in the region. Either they were immigrants or they were slaves. And there was a huge bluegrass community that started developing in the 90s globally, particularly in Germany and Japan, because of the influences globally. There are lots of global influences. Actually, my dad has done European tours, and there are lots of people that love bluegrass music, and that his favorite place to play music is in Prague. So it's pretty international.
That's awesome.
So if you think that bluegrass is just for hicks and hillbillies, that's just not the case.
Yeah, all those hicks in the Czech Republic,
Right, exactly. Excuse me. So the core instruments, like I said, it's all acoustic traditionally. And the instruments are the fiddle, which is very iconic in bluegrass music. The banjo is iconic in bluegrass music.
Time out, I have a question. This is going to probably happen a lot because I know nothing. Difference between a fiddle and a violin?
The way you play it.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful because I didn't know. I assumed that there was something slightly different. So the actual instrument itself is the same.
The exact same. A viola is different. It's a little bigger.
Yeah.
But a fiddle and a violin are exactly the same thing. Okay.
Helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And always, yes, I love these questions because sometimes I just I can buzz right past something. The banjo, we're going to get into it later, how it happened, but there are many different ways to play the banjo, but the bluegrass style is 3-finger style. So when you play the banjo, you literally play it. And if you're watching, again, you should watch on YouTube. You play it with these 3 fingers and you do it in a roll. So you do either a forward roll or a backward roll. or you do an alternating thumb roll, which is 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
So we're using our middle finger, our index, and our thumb.
Yes.
Okay, got
and
it.
You can either go forward, thumb, index, middle, or you can go backward, middle, index, thumb, or you can do the alternating, which is thumb, index, middle, middle. And that is a 3-finger style of banjo, which is different than a folk style of clawhammer banjo or other vaudevillian styles of banjo. So this was actually pioneered in the 20th century. So then you have guitars and mandolins and an upright bass. So that's like an upright bass, if you've never seen one, which I hope you have, is basically like a giant cello that stands taller than a human being, and you play the bass acoustically instead of, plugged in.
I fucking love the upright bass. It is so cool. There's a guy that plays the Broadway scene in Nashville. His name is Slick Joe Fick, and he is the best upright bass player I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah, I love a good bass player. It can make or break a bluegrass band, honestly. So bluegrass is defined often by the mood of the music, which can be sad or melancholy, and that's kind of where it started, was these old Scotch-Irish ballads, and they had been generationally passed down since the 1700s in Appalachia, just by playing pick and grins and with family. And so in the early 1900s, this guy named Bascom Lamar Lunsford, which is just a great name, he was born in 1882 from Western North Carolina. He's called the Minstrel of the Appalachians. He's actually an Appalachian lawyer who took it upon himself to collect all of this mountain music that had, before him going around and collecting it, had just been passed on as oral and musical tradition. And so he gathered all of these music, all of these ballad, all of these musical, different songs, stuff like that, and put it into a book, and actually made a canon of early bluegrass music. And so when radios became popular was when we first got recordings of early bluegrass music that we can trace the lineage of modern bluegrass back to. And that starts with the Carter family. Can't talk about bluegrass without talking about the Carter family.
I will
Chuck,
say,
have you ever heard of them?
No, I haven't heard of this Carter family. Really, the only Carter family I heard of is Jimmy Carter, but I think peanuts are a little different than bluegrass. I will say, the only Bascom I ever knew was a guy named Daniel Bascom, who was my RA in college, and the only thing that I remember about him is I was really drunk in the bathroom one night, and he kicked the stall door open and scared the living shit out of me because he thought it was funny. Which it was funny. Looking back on it, it was hilarious, but I was horrified. So no, to answer your question, I have not heard of the Carter family.
Well, the Carter family, they are legendary, and they're from Hiltons, Virginia, represent good old Southwestern Virginia. So this band included 3 people. It was Mother Maybelle Carter, who is really most well known for her style of guitar playing, and she played the autoharp, which if you've never seen an autoharp, it's an old instrument, and it's very bluegrassy. It looks like a tiny harp. You hold it like this, and you play it with a pick. And so there's this wonderful song called Wildwood Flower. That's their most famous song, which features the autoharp and the guitar. Other members of the band were AP and Sarah, and it was a family band. And so you probably only ever heard, maybe Wildwood Flower, but all of the roots are really in the Carter family. They recorded from 1927 to 1956, and they were some of the first folk music to be recorded for radio. So now is where we get to the father of bluegrass music, hailing from the great Commonwealth of Kentucky, Bill Monroe, who first started recording music in 1927 as well. Now, I will just say that Bill himself is not from what the Appalachian Regional Commission defines as Appalachia. He is from Rosine, Kentucky. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But he's Appalachia adjacent, and he had an undeniable impact on the Appalachian region. And so I think it's really important to talk about him and how he elevated knowledge of the state of Kentucky, people coming to Kentucky. You'll likely know some of his music as Blue Moon of Kentucky, the Kentucky Waltz, and Uncle Pitt.
It also, it's like, if that upsets you that it's not within the ARC boundaries, I don't know what the fuck to tell you. I'm sorry. Like, it's okay. It's okay that it's not, all right? We look at the consummate origin of it. It's okay.
Yeah, so just totally
buckle up, sit back. It's all right. Take,
Yep.
Get your cornbread gummy. It's fine.
Yep. So it's just important. His impact on Appalachia was indelible, and his legacy is still very, very strong in the region. So as Bill was cutting records left and right, and a huge success already, and I know I kind of went. I'm trying to get a whole broad range. I know I went over him fast, but I'm trying to make sure that we get a full look at what bluegrass as what it is and how it came to be. As he was recording, a couple of the best loved and most famous bluegrass bands were forming and coming up the ranks. And here's where I want to spend a little bit of time, because I feel like these two bands are really who made the biggest impact on bluegrass music still to this day. And those bands are the Stanley Brothers and Flatt Scruggs. So let's talk about the Stanley Brothers first. Ralph and Carter, they are from Clinch Mountain, Virginia. They actually have a song called the Clinch Mountain Backstep, which is the first song I ever learned how to finger pick on the guitar. They played from 1946 to 1966, and they recorded the first occurrence of maybe the most famous bluegrass song of all time, which is Man of Constant Sorrow, which was made famous by Dan Tyminski, the Coen brothers, and a one Mr. George Clooney in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I'm sure you've heard of that one, Chuck.
Oh, that is, look, my knowledge of bluegrass is very slim, but I have heard of that. I know of the movie. I've never seen the movie. I just have heard the soundtrack. It's an incredible soundtrack, and that was a great song by, storied former fake ER physician George Clooney.
Yeah, it's our family's favorite movie. We watch it all the time. It's got lots of family friends in it, and lots of folks who we really love who played music for it. So they also recorded hits like Little Maggie and Angel Band, and they were the pioneers of what people call now the bluegrass high lonesome sound, particularly Ralph Stanley. So he's saying in this kind of real high-pitched, high octave that was very striking and different than anything that folks had heard before. It's really kind of, when you think of traditional bluegrass and that sound, you really are thinking of the Stanley Brothers and Ralph Stanley, who performed. I mean, the man performed forever. I mean, literally, he was performing until he was like 90-something years old.
So when you say high lonesome, is that a reference to like the mood? I know you mentioned the high, but the lonesome part.
So I don't think it's meant to be the mood. I think that it's meant to be like it's literally a lonesome sound that he's making that invokes this feeling. The songs are sometimes they're fast paced and they're they're not necessarily sad songs, but Appalachia was going through a lot in those times. It was really, the uneven development in the region was stark, and folks who were playing music, a lot of times it did reflect how folks were living in the region. And so they called it this high lonesome sound because it really appealed to the working class and to folks who were struggling to make ends meet. A lot of it was a gospel kind of sound and was very appealing to the working folks of Appalachia.
And this was like, you mentioned this was like in the 40s and 50s, that kind of like time, sort of late 40s.
Yeah, it was before the Great Society. It was before the War on Poverty. So this was when this was a lot of so there were writers who would visit the region, and they called it a land lost in time. So this is when Appalachia is really experiencing some of the height of coal company exploitation, lumber exploitation, the extraction economy, and folks are suffering during this time period.
Yeah, because that would have been around the time that like people started losing their jobs to mechanization in the mining industry, like not quite as much as today, but where they started to introduce the types of machinery that would kind of take people out of their jobs. They wouldn't have jobs anymore. So yeah, the context of it being kind of a pretty dark-ish time there, especially in Appalachia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Ralph Stanley really appealed to that audience. So now we go on to Flatt and Scruggs, and I like to think the Stanley Brothers are the deep cuts, and Flatt and Scruggs are the headline, and that's kind of how you can picture these two. Flatt and Scruggs are two people, Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs to be exact, and they're my personal favorite bluegrass band. Earl Scruggs is who inspired my dad to play the banjo, and so I have a deep love of Earl Scruggs, and I met him. I had the opportunity to meet him before he passed away many times, and so I really their music is very important to me. They played from 1948 to 1969 as a band. They continued playing separately after, and they really were the high watermark for bluegrass in popular culture in America. You may have heard of them. Here are just a couple of things you may have heard them from. The Ballad of Jed Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies is Flatt and Scruggs.
Damn.
Yeah.
It's a banger.
It is a banger. The Foggy Mountain Breakdown from the movie Bonnie and Clyde. The Martha White Flower theme song, which was on radio and television all over during the 1960s. And the Petticoat Junction theme song, which was a television show during that time, was also them. So they had really, really broad national appeal, and they took bluegrass music from being this regional kind of Appalachian and Southern music. They really made it accessible to all parts of the country. So they were kind of the first and most major exporters of bluegrass to the rest of the country. Now, they are most famous for revolutionizing what the banjo could sound like and how it could be played. Earl Scruggs was the person who invented the three-finger style of playing. Before, it was all this kind of the clawhammer folk style, vaudeville style, and Earl Scruggs literally invented the three-finger style banjo playing. And so he is the model for all modern bluegrass players who pick the three-finger style. He is kind of like the godfather of banjo playing.
So when you look at these three fingers now, folks, your index, your middle, and your thumb, think of Earl. Look, Earls have been maligned in country music, rightly so by the Chicks, Dixie Chicks.
Yeah.
But this is a good example of an Earl. We like to see it.
Yeah, we love Earl Scruggs. It's very funny. When I was this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's really hilarious. When I met him for the first time, I had seen him. I loved the Beverly Hillbillies as a kid, and we can talk about in another episode both the problems and complexities of the Beverly Hillbillies and what that did and did not do for Appalachia. But I loved it as a child, and he played the banjo on the show a lot. And in one of the episodes, Ellie Mae, who always had animals around, was trying to teach her monkey, her chimpanzee, how to play the banjo. And Granny mistakes Earl's playing for the chimp, and she says, "Oh, that hairy little goober with the banjo." And so when I met Earl Scruggs, I asked him, this was when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, I said, "Are you that hairy little goober with the banjo?" And he had this really iconic smile, and he just looked up at me and he smiled and he said, "Well, I guess I am."
That sounds like a nice guy.
Yes, he was a lovely person. So other notable artists during this time, because we can't hit everybody, are Jimmy Martin and Doc Watson and the Osborne Brothers, who you may know from Rocky Top fame. That's the Osborne Brothers.
Like Rocky Top, the song?
Yeah.
Go Vols, all right.
Yeah. So the
Rocky
Osborne
Top.
Brothers.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's that high lonesome sound.
That's me. That was my nickname in college, High Lonesome.
High Lonesome. I love it. So that's basically Bluegrass.
Not a good one for the ladies, I'll tell you that. No. High Lonesome, hard pass.
Not for me. So that was Bluegrass Gen 1. All of these artists influenced a whole new generation that revolutionized the genre even further. And some of the biggest artists to come out of the second generation were people like Tony Rice, who before he died was consistently ranked on Rolling Stone's top 100 best guitar players in the world. He was truly incredible. And if you ever have the opportunity to, Google him, look him up, it's incredible what he was able to do with a guitar. Ricky Skaggs, who my dad won his Grammy was with Ricky Skaggs. Ricky really took bluegrass country, and he won the CMA Performing Artist of the Year, I think in 1986, and he covered those old songs like Uncle Pin that Bill Monroe had done, and he made them palatable for country artists. So there are lots of Ricky songs that he just he took that song, he redid it, and he made it for a new audience. So listen to Uncle Pin by Bill Monroe, and then listen to Uncle Pin by Ricky Skaggs, and it's a different vibe, but it's you can definitely see the inspiration there. Then there was the folks like J.D. Crowe, who really inherited the mantle of Earl Scruggs. He became kind of the main influence of the three-finger style banjo picking after that. Sam Bush, who's a super progressive, really amazing mandolin player. Jerry Douglas, who's literally played on like megastars albums. He's considered the best dobro player in the world. Still touring, still all over. He played with people like Paul Simon and Garth Brooks, like we talked about earlier in the episode. Elvis Costello, Mumford and Sons, you name it, he's been on it. He's truly a remarkable musician. And then finally Doyle Lawson, who really he carried on that high lonesome sound for a more modern audience, and so he was inspired mostly by Ralph Stanley, but he revolutionized it for a new era. So after this crew, which were really, they reached their height in the 70s and the 80s, there's many of those folks are still touring and putting out music today, but they are considered the older generation now. But they made way for an era of bluegrass that invited more people in. If you notice, I've only mentioned a couple of women. The rest of these folks are white dudes. And that's one of the reasons that bluegrass was kind of really relegated to a lower form of entertainment. It was because it was just these poor white men who were known as bluegrass musicians. Now, that was never the actual case. There are incredible musicians who were active in those early days that were women and people of color that just were not as broadly advertised or known as popular during the time. So this second wave, though, really brought forward a new generation that included people like Alison Krauss, who is a global superstar now, Rhonda Vincent, who's sometimes called the Queen of Bluegrass, Brian Sutton, who's a Western North Carolina boy. I actually caught the bouquet at his wedding when I was 6 years old.
Again, folks, we're talking to bluegrass royalty here on the pod today.
Yeah, I sort of. Dale Ann Bradley, who is just incredible, still out and about today. Bela Fleck, who does not play three-finger style. He actually made famous the melodic style of banjo, which is basically, it's like finger picking, but for a banjo. It's really, he's insane. He's truly just bonkers good. And people like Steve Martin, who actually he tours and plays with a band out of Brevard, North Carolina called the Steep Canyon Rangers. And so Steve Martin is a really wonderful ambassador for bluegrass music. I think a lot of people in the early days were like, who's this Hollywood guy coming to take our music? But he has done so much to get bluegrass music out there, to get the banjo taken seriously. He wrote a bluegrass musical and put it on Broadway. I mean, the man has really been an ambassador for bluegrass music.
I did not know that. That's really cool. I, again, I scratched at the surface for trying to find a way to contribute, because bluegrass is never something that I was ever introduced to when I was a kid. My parents always just listened to like traditional country, but when I was in Nashville, I got exposed to it more. And so you mentioned, I actually see, and I've always been pronouncing his name wrong because I was pronouncing it Bela Fleck, so that tells you how much I know. But Bela Fleck, the way that I got introduced to him, and one of my favorite banjo players, his wife Abigail Washburn.
Oh, love Abigail Washburn.
I got invited to a thing. The Tennessee Environmental Council does something called the Green Tie Affair every year. It's like a black tie, but it's green, because it's environmentalists, and it's a fundraiser is what it is. I went to it for work a couple times, but one time they had Bela Fleck and Abigail Washburn as the musical entertainment. And I had never heard of them before, and so everybody was like hyping it up, and I was like, who are these people? And I listened, I was like, whoa, these people are amazing. And they're good environmentalists, so there you go.
Yes, they are. They're very progressive. Both of them do a lot of great work, a lot of charity work, and their act is a sight to behold. I mean, they do this thing where Bela plays the banjo, and Abigail will literally dance so she'll have tap shoes on and she'll dance the beat while singing. I mean, what they do together is really magical, and I appreciate their contribution so much, because they have also kind of brought about a new niche in the genre, which is desperately needed, and I really love what they have been able to do. And so Bela kind of brings us to this, we've talked about the first generation, the second generation, and then we now have we've talked about the third. We're on to Gen 4 now, and that's where we reside. That's the time in which we live, is Gen 4 bluegrass music. And we get a much broader scope of America represented in this generation. So not only has bluegrass music, it started in Appalachia, and it's gotten more and more broad appeal, and brought more and more people in, but now we're getting people from all over the country contributing. There's like a California Bluegrass Music Association. There's a California Bluegrass Pride Association, that I get their newsletter. So there's a lot more room, and people are making space for new voices, and it is a beautiful time to love bluegrass music right now. So the biggest stars today, the biggest one by leaps and bounds by far, is Billy Strings. He's winning Grammys left and right, and he's recording like acoustic versions of Circles with Post Malone. Like, he is everywhere. The guy is absolutely insane on the guitar. He sings like a bluegrass artist, plays like a bluegrass artist, but he is an open weed smoker, which is not usually something that's traditional in Appalachian music and bluegrass. And he is all about psychedelics, and he will literally do these jam concerts where he's got like synths and he's got pedals for his guitar, and it's very, as I said at the beginning, it's traditionally all unplugged, and he is adding these distortions and making bluegrass something that is palatable for a new generation, and innovating in ways that we haven't seen ever. So Billy Strings, if you need a place to start with bluegrass music and you say, maybe the old stuff isn't my thing, I get it. Start with Billy Strings. So then after that, I would say Molly Tuttle. And Billy is actually not from Appalachia. He is from Michigan. And so what he has done is, I always think that you need to honor a place and the music of the people that came before you. And this is traditionally a rural mountain music. And Billy has studied this deeply and is constantly making reference to the people that have gone before him, and making sure that folks know that this didn't start with Billy Strings. This started with mountain people in the 1800s. And that's something I think is really special, is that, there can be cultural appropriation when it comes to the music of the working class. We've seen that in all kinds of working class music that goes mainstream. And so I really appreciate that Billy Strings is not only paying tribute to the people that went before him, but also talking about how the banjo came from Africa, which is amazing. And I think that should be talked about more, that is a contribution of slaves to our mountain music. And so that's something that I really appreciate about him. So next is Molly Tuttle, who actually invented a new style of bluegrass guitar. And so she's innovating as well. There's lots of new stuff. She just put out a new album that pays tribute to the oldies. That's something that bluegrass does a lot. We like to we like to cover songs and make them our own. And so, Little Maggie has been recorded 100 times. My dad won a Grammy for playing Little Maggie, and then Billy Strings recorded Little Maggie a couple of years ago in a new way. So that started with the Stanley Brothers, that started way back, and now it's been passed down. And that's something that oral tradition is still so important in bluegrass music. Another is Rhiannon Giddens. If you don't know her, she's really amazing. She is of Carolina Chocolate Drops fame. She's now a touring musician and a banjo educator, teaching folks all over the country about the African roots of the banjo. And then finally, Sierra Hull, who is perhaps the greatest mandolin player to ever grace a stage. She is truly a prodigy. She started really young, and she has put out some of the best instrumental music that has been put out in bluegrass music's history, and is really making a name for women in bluegrass. So I know I didn't get to cover everybody. So honorable mentions, I would say folks like Tim O'Brien, who my favorite song that he does is Paradise, which folks know, of many folks have done it, but he does a version of Paradise that really resonates with a lot of folks from West Virginia. Dolly Parton, who was heavily influenced by bluegrass. Del McCurry, Old Crow Medicine Show, the Punch Brothers, who are doing a lot of modern kind of experimental bluegrass. Noam Pickilney, who is doing melodic banjo like you wouldn't believe. I mean, these people are really, really incredible musicians. And then shameless plug, my dad's band Balsam Range, they've been together for over a decade. They have won the IBMA Performers of the Year 4 times. They've won Vocal Group of the Year, I think 5 or 6 times. And so, yes, my dad is one of the best banjo players in the world. Was literally declared by the state of North Carolina as a North Carolina state treasure. And received an honorary doctorate. Yes, and received an honorary doctorate for his contributions to Appalachian music. So Mark Pruett, MARC, look him up. Look up Balsam Range. And I'm just so honored to be able to, as somebody who is not a touring musician, I love to play music, I love to sing, but I'm so honored to be able to have this platform to really talk about this music that I love and that is such a huge part of my life. And I thank you for bearing with me today, Chuck, as I did this long monologue, but I'm so passionate about this and passionate about our Appalachian music because I think that it's such a part of us and it's a part of how the world views us. And I would love for more people to know it and understand it and love it as well.
Yeah, of course. And this is not the last time we're going to be talking about it, too, for sure. And we hope to have musicians on this show very soon. I love this. I'm glad. You know what? I didn't even think. I totally didn't even think about Old Crow, but there's one of my favorite bands and one that does have a very heavy bluegrass influence. They throw in the upright bass there quite a bit. Funny, true story. This is just like what I loved about Nashville. I met their frontman, Ketch, at church one day.
Oh, really?
Because he went to one of the small Episcopal churches in like Germantown or somewhere. And we were just like, Chris and I were looking for a church at the time. And it was just small. There's probably like 30 people there. And we were just walking around talking to people. And I was talking to this guy. Like, I didn't know what he looked like. And I went up to him and was like, he was like, yeah, my name is Ketch. And I was like, oh, yeah, like, blah, 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 what do you do? And he's like, well, I'm in a band. It's called Old Crow Medicine Show. And I was like, shut the fuck up. What? I was like, I tried to like keep it cool, but I was not good at it. He's also just a really cool guy. Like,
yeah,
I saw him at a naturalization ceremony for my friend who was getting his citizenship, and Ketch was there because he helped start a small like school, an Episcopal school in town, and he was bringing a class of like first graders there to understand the citizenship process, and it was really neat.
That is really cool. No, I love those Nashville stories. My dad has played every big venue in Nashville, and my favorite, my mom's favorite, she tells it all the time, and I think it's a really funny story too of my childhood, is my dad used to play the Opry all the time, the Grand Ole Opry. He's played the Ryman. He's
fucking incredible, by the way.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's absolutely
most musicians
amazing.
and performers dream of performing there.
Yeah, and my dad would just tote his kids along, and we sat backstage and watched it from the screens backstage. In that time, I remember very vividly, I used to love Porter Wagner, who was an old country musician. He had a show, and that's where Dolly got her start, and she wrote "I Will Always Love You" about Porter Wagner. And I remember Porter opening the door for me one time, and then he started talking to me as a little kid walking into the Grand Ole Opry in his like rhinestone suit, where he would open it and it'd say "Hey there" on the inside of his rhinestone suit.
I love it.
And meeting Dolly Parton, my dad has a story, I don't remember it, but my dad has a story of Johnny Cash looking at me as a baby and being, "Well, that's a pretty little baby there, Mark."
What the fuck?
So yeah, so like these are
just bury that in there. My God.
Well,
that's incredible.
I mean, we need to have my dad on the show to talk about some of these experiences, because like those are that. So I grew up in that backstage, and the moral of this story, the reason my mom likes to tell it, is because I really wanted to see Dolly singing from the audience, and I said, why don't we get to sit out there with the regular people? We just have to sit back here, and we don't get to see any of it. But my mom was like, you're backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, and you want to be in the audience? And that's just kind of like, those are the places where I grew up. So it's really special for me to get to kind of share the gospel of bluegrass music.
I'm tweeting something about you being a pretty baby. I love it. Fitting, the gospel at the First Church of Country Music.